The sky was quiet, too quiet. Then, without warning, the clouds tore apart like paper, and a massive shadow fell over the valley. People looked up, frozen in fear, as a ship larger than a mountain slowly descended from the clouds. Its surface burned with red lights, and the air cracked with thunder as it landed near the village. The ground shook so hard that windows shattered. Trees bent and birds fled into the distance. Children screamed, dogs barked, and old men clutched their hearts. From the heart of the glowing ship, a door opened with a deep hiss, and from the light stepped out the one they had all heard about in whispers. Vorak the Conqueror. The alien warlord who ruled 100 worlds. He was taller than any human. His armor made of black steel and glowing red veins. His eyes burned like molten fire, and every step he took made the ground tremble. Behind him came his soldiers. Tall, armored creatures with glowing rifles and emotionless faces. The air filled with the sound of their marching boots, echoing like drums of doom. "Bow before Vorak," one of the soldiers shouted, his voice like thunder. No one dared to move. Then slowly, one by one, the villagers fell to their knees, pressing their heads to the dirt. They had heard stories. Planets burned, cities crushed, people erased, all because they refused to bow. No one wanted to die, all except one, a boy, no older than 16, stood in the middle of the square, his clothes dusty. His eyes steady, he did not kneel, he did not lower his head. He just stared at the towering warlord. Silent but unbroken, the soldiers noticed first, pointing their weapons toward him. One of them growled, "The human does not bow." The warlord stopped walking. The air seemed to freeze around him. He turned his head slowly toward the boy, his burning eyes narrowing. "Human," Vorak's voice rumbled like a storm. "Why do you not kneel?" The boy said nothing. His heart was pounding, but he stood tall. "I asked you a question," Vorak said again, his voice deep and cold. "Do you wish to die?" Finally, the boy spoke, his voice trembling but clear. "My name is Eli," he said, "and no, I don't wish to die." "Then kneel," Vorak ordered. Eli shook his head. "No." The silence that followed was heavier than the air itself. Even the wind stopped moving. The villagers looked at the boy in horror, whispering, "He's gone mad." One woman covered her mouth, tears running down her face. Everyone waited for the flash of death that always came after defiance. But Vorak did not kill him. He just stared, long and quiet, as if trying to understand something he had never seen before. "Do you know who I am?" Vorak asked. Eli nodded. "You're the one everyone fears." "Then you know what I can do," Vorak said, stepping closer, his shadow swallowing the boy. "I can crush your bones with one thought." Eli looked up, his voice calm but firm. "You can crush my bones, but you can't make me kneel." The soldiers hissed in anger, raising their weapons, but Vorak lifted his hand. "Stand down," he said, his voice echoing across the square. He studied the boy's face for a long time, then asked, "Why?" "Because kneeling means I accept that you own me," Eli said quietly. "And no one owns me." Vorak blinked slowly, something strange flickering in his red eyes. Curiosity, maybe respect. He had seen countless enemies, but never one like this. A child with no weapon, no armor, no power, and yet he stood tall against a god of war. "What are you, human?" Vorak whispered almost to himself. "I'm just a boy from Earth," Eli replied. "But I don't bow to bullies." The warlord's soldiers shifted nervously. Not knowing what to do, Vorak turned his gaze to the villagers still kneeling, trembling in the dirt, then back to the boy who refused. Finally, he gave a small nod. "Very well," Vorak said. "Then you will come with me." Gasps filled the air. Eli's mother cried out, "No, he's just a boy." But soldiers grabbed him by the arms. Eli didn't struggle. He looked straight into Vorak's eyes and said, "You can take me, but I'll still stand." Vorak stared back, silent for the first time in 1,000 years. The great warlord felt something strange inside. Not anger, not pride, but something he could not name, perhaps. Respect. The soldiers dragged Eli toward the glowing ramp of the ship. The villagers watched, hearts broken. As the ship rose back into the clouds, a voice echoed across the valley. "The boy who would not kneel has been taken by the stars." And though the ship disappeared, that day became a story, a whisper that would spread from one corner of the galaxy to another, about a simple human boy who refused to bow, and the alien warlord who could not forget him. Eli opened his eyes to darkness, cold air touched his skin. and a low humming sound surrounded him. He was no longer on Earth through the small window beside him. He saw nothing but endless stars. The ship was moving fast, too fast for any human machine. He sat on a cold metal floor, his hands locked by glowing cuffs. Across from him stood two alien guards with pale armor and eyes like blue fire. They watched him closely, whispering in a language he didn't understand. Eli tried to breathe slowly, remembering his father's words. Fear only wins when you let it. The door opened with a hiss. A tall shadow filled the room. It was Vorak. Even in the dim light, his armor shone like burning iron. Stand, he ordered, his voice deep as thunder. Eli stood, shaking slightly but not showing it. Vorak stared at him for a long time before speaking. You are far from your world, human, he said. Here, your courage means nothing. Eli looked up, meeting his eyes. We'll see. The warlord's eyes glowed brighter. Interesting, he muttered. Let us see how long that courage lasts. He waved his hand, and the guards dragged Eli down a long corridor. The walls pulsed with light, alive like veins carrying fire. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. They entered a wide circular room, the air thick with energy. In the center stood a glass chamber filled with fog and strange shadows moving inside. This, Vorak said, stepping forward, is the trial chamber. He turned to Eli. Every world that I conquer sends me its strongest, its bravest. They face the test, Vorak continued. And they all kneel before it ends. Eli frowned. What's the test? Vorak smiled, but it wasn't kind. The test of fear. The glass opened with a hiss, and cold mist spilled across the floor. From within came shapes, dark, twisted, impossible to describe. They weren't creatures exactly, but moving shadows with whispering voices. Eli felt a chill crawl up his spine. The voices spoke his name in his own voice. Whispering his worst memories, he saw flashes. His father's funeral, his mother crying, the war that destroyed their town. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. The fear wasn't real, but it felt real. It wrapped around his heart like ice, whispering, you are nothing, you will break. Vorak watched from behind the glass, silent. The test had broken warriors twice Eli's size, creatures with claws and armor. But the boy was still breathing, still fighting. He could see Eli's eyes flickering with pain, but also with something stronger, defiance. Eli forced himself to stand, his body shaking. He looked into the mist and shouted, You can't scare me with my past. The shadows hissed louder, twisting into monstrous faces. He took a step forward, then another, shouting again, You can't control me. The fog around him began to burn away like smoke under sunlight. The guards gasped. Vorak's expression changed. His burning eyes softened slightly. Eli collapsed to one knee, exhausted but alive. The shadows vanished completely, leaving the chamber silent. After a long pause, Vorak entered, the sound of his boots echoing through the chamber. He stood over Eli and said, You face the fear. Eli looked up, his voice weak but steady. I told you, I don't kneel, for a moment. The great warlord said nothing, then he turned away. Almost as if he didn't want the others to see his face, he ordered his guards. Take him to the observation deck. Eli was dragged away again, half conscious but proud. The ship's corridors glowed as he was taken higher, through the windows. He saw a planet burning in the distance. A world Vorak had conquered, Eli whispered to himself. That's what happens when no one stands up. When they reached the deck, the guards left him there alone through the glass wall. He could see the stars shining brighter than ever. He placed his hand on the cold surface and said softly, If I ever go home, I'll tell them. Fear is only power when you give it power. Behind him, unnoticed, Vorak stood in the shadows, watching. The warlord's heart was heavy with thoughts he didn't understand. He had seen countless warriors scream, cry and beg for mercy, but not this boy. This human had looked into the heart of fear and did not break. Vorak spoke quietly, almost to himself. What kind of creature are you, human? But Eli didn't hear him. He was staring at the stars. His reflection in the glass, small but unbowed, he whispered, I'll never kneel. And somewhere deep inside the mighty ship, something began to change. Not just in the boy, but in the alien warlord who had never known mercy. When Eli woke up again, he was no longer in the trial room. He was lying on a cold floor made of glass that shimmered with light. Above him, the stars stretched forever, like diamonds trapped in black water. He sat up slowly, blinking at the strange beauty around him. It wasn't a room, not really. It was a massive cage floating inside the ship's core. Transparent walls surrounded him, showing thousands of glowing cells floating nearby. Inside each one, different beings moved, aliens of every shape and color. Some had wings, others had silver skin or long glowing eyes. All of them looked broken, tired, and hopeless. Eli touched the wall. It hummed softly like a heartbeat. There were no doors, no windows, just energy everywhere. He tried shouting, "Hey, can anyone hear me?" At first there was only silence. Then a faint voice answered from the next cell. "You're new," it said weakly. "Another one for the collection." Eli pressed his face to the glowing wall. Trying to see, a pair of eyes looked back, large and golden, belonging to a creature that looked part human, part bird. "My name's Eli," he said. The creature tilted its head. "I'm Kale," it replied. "You shouldn't talk too loud. The guards don't like it." Eli shrugged. "Let them listen." Kale gave a sad smile. "You're brave, human," he said. "That won't last," Eli frowned. "What do you mean?" Kale looked down, his feathers trembling. "Everyone says that when they arrive, but this place, it eats courage." Eli looked around again, at the silent faces behind the other walls. Every prisoner had the same look, like they had already died. But their bodies didn't know it yet. Eli clenched his fists. Then maybe it's time someone reminded them what living looks like. Hours passed, or maybe days. There was no sun, no night, only endless stars beyond the glass sometimes. Mechanical arms brought strange food cubes through the energy barrier. Most prisoners ate in silence, eyes down, but Eli started talking. Quietly at first, he told stories about Earth, about oceans, rain, and laughter. He spoke about his father's workshop, his mother's cooking, the warmth of sunlight. At first no one listened, but slowly heads began to turn. Kale asked, "Why do humans talk so much?" Eli smiled. "Because when you talk, you remember you're alive." Soon even the quietest creatures began asking questions. "What's an ocean?" One asked. "What's wind?" asked another. Eli laughed softly, describing everything with simple words. The prisoners listened like children hearing magic for the first time. Up above, hidden behind layers of glass and shadow, Vorak watched. He had ordered the cameras on this level years ago to study fear, but what he saw now was something he couldn't explain. The boy was not afraid. He was teaching them, giving them hope. One of the guards spoke beside him. "Shall we silence him, my lord?" Vorak didn't answer at first. He just kept watching. Finally, he said, "No." The guard hesitated. "But—" "I said no," Vorak growled. His eyes still locked on the boy's reflection. Back in the cage, Eli noticed the small light in the ceiling blinking. Someone was watching. He stood and looked straight into it. "I don't care who you are," he said clearly. "You can lock me up, but you can't shut me up." His voice echoed through the chamber. The prisoners looked at each other in surprise. For the first time in years, a sound broke the silence. Laughter. Kyle laughed first, then others joined in. Soft at first, then louder. The sound rolled through the cages like a wave. Eli smiled, sitting down again. "See?" he said. "That's what it sounds like when you start to remember hope." Far above, Vorak's jaw tightened. He turned away, his voice low. "Hope is dangerous." But deep inside, something in him stirred. A memory he had long buried. A memory of his own childhood, long before he became a conqueror. Before fear became his weapon, later when the lights dimmed and the ship drifted silently through space, Eli sat with his back to the wall, staring at the stars beyond the glass. Kale spoke softly from the next cell. "Do you really think we'll ever get out?" Eli didn't answer right away. Then he smiled. "Maybe not," he said. "But they'll never forget we tried." The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with quiet strength, and for the first time, the cage didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a beginning. Vorak stood alone in his command chamber, staring at the same stars. He whispered to himself, "A human boy born from a dying world gives hope to my prisoners." He shook his head slowly. Perhaps the universe still holds surprises. And far below, in the cage of stars, the human boy closed his eyes and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll tell them about freedom." The days, or maybe weeks, passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the ship. Eli had lost track of time, but not of purpose. Each day he spoke to the others, shared stories, and gave them strength little by little. The cold cage of stars began to warm with whispers of courage. The aliens in nearby cells started talking again. They shared their memories, their losses, their anger. And through every story, one name kept spreading: Eli. The human who wouldn't bow. Even the guards noticed the change. Prisoners who used to stare at the floor now met their eyes. They began to move slower, more careful, as if afraid something invisible was growing inside the cells. And they were right, something was growing one night. While the ship drifted past a dying star, Kale whispered through the wall, "Eli, there's a way out." Eli turned, eyes sharp. "What do you mean?" Kyle leaned closer, his golden feathers glowing faintly in the dark. "The ship will stop at a fueling station tomorrow," he said. "It's the only time the energy fields go down for a few seconds." Eli frowned. "Seconds aren't enough," Kale smiled. "For most. No, but maybe for you." Eli thought about it for a long moment, staring at the flickering stars beyond the glass. He could feel the risk, the danger, but also the pull of freedom. "Tell the others," he said quietly. "Not to lose hope if I fail." Kale nodded slowly. "You're serious?" Eli smiled. "I've been serious since the day I didn't kneel." Far above, in the command deck, Vorak watched the stars drift past. He hadn't slept in cycles. The human boy haunted his thoughts. He remembered the fire in Eli's eyes, the voice that had refused to break. "Why can't I stop thinking about him?" Vorak muttered. His second in command, a tall creature named Drath, turned. "Because weakness spreads, my lord." Vorak's gaze hardened. "Is that what you call it?" Drath nodded. "Hope is just a prettier name for rebellion." Vorak said nothing, but his hands tightened behind his back that night. The ship docked with a massive black station floating in deep space. Robotic arms reached out to refuel the engines, and the hum of power dimmed. For a heartbeat, the ship was silent. In that silence, Eli acted. He pressed both hands against the energy wall of his cell. The barrier flickered, weak for just a second. He pushed harder, ignoring the burn on his palms. With a sudden crack, light exploded and the field broke. Eli stumbled out, coughing, his wrists still glowing from the cuffs. Kale gasped, "You did it!" Eli looked around quickly. "Not yet," he said. "Now we help the others." He grabbed a fallen metal rod from the floor and smashed the control node between their cells. The lights flickered again, and one by one, more cages began to open. The prisoners stepped out, shocked. Hesitant, afraid, Eli shouted, "Don't stop! You're free now. Help each other." Kale flapped his wings and flew toward the next section, breaking more controls. The alarms began to scream through the halls. Red lights flashed. Guards rushed in, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" one shouted. Eli grabbed a pipe from the ground. Swinging it hard, the weapon sparked against the guard's armor. Kale swooped in, slashing with his claws. The others followed. Aliens who had forgotten how to fight. Now fighting again for the first time. Vorak's warship shook, not from weapons, but from rebellion. The prisoners surged through the corridors. Overwhelming the guards, Eli moved with purpose, shouting directions, helping the wounded. He wasn't just surviving now, he was leading. In the command deck, Drath roared, "They're breaking free!" Vorak turned sharply. "How?" "Someone bypassed the cage locks." Drath hissed, "It's the human!" Vorak froze for a moment, then said, "Seal the lower decks." Drath moved to obey, but Vorak stopped him. "No, wait." Drath frowned. "My lord?" Vorak's voice was low. "I want to see what he does." On the lower level, Eli and Kale reached the main gate. The control panel was guarded by a heavy blast door. Kale groaned, "We'll never open it in time." Eli looked around, spotting a power conduit sparking nearby. He tore off his cuffs and pressed them against the metal. Creating a short circuit, the entire deck flashed white. Then the door opened with a hiss. Wind rushed through the corridor as escape pods lined the walls. Eli turned to the crowd of freed prisoners. "Go," he shouted. "Find your worlds again. Find your homes." Kale grabbed his arm. "What about you?" Eli smiled faintly. "Someone has to stay and finish this." As the last pod launched into space, the alarms went silent. Eli turned slowly and found Vorak standing behind him. The warlord looked down at the human, his expression unreadable. "You could have escaped," Vorak said. Eli took a breath. "Freedom isn't running away, it's standing up." Vorak studied him for a long moment. Then quietly, almost with pride, he said, "You are not like the others," Eli replied softly. "Neither are you." The ship's lights flickered. Smoke filled the corridors, and in that chaos, something unthinkable was born. An understanding between a conqueror and a boy. a spark that would soon ignite a fire across the stars. Smoke filled the corridors like dark fog. The alarm screamed, echoing through the warship. The rebellion had shaken the mighty vessel to its bones. Eli stood in the flickering light, his clothes burned, his hands shaking, but his eyes still steady. Across from him stood Vorak. Tall and silent, his armor was cracked, his red eyes dim, yet his presence filled the room like thunder. For a long moment neither moved. Only the hum of failing engines filled the air. "You could have fled," Vorak said finally, his voice low. Eli's breathing was heavy. "And leave them behind?" He shook his head slowly. "No, that's not who I am." Vorak's gaze hardened. "You risked your life for strangers." Eli looked up. "That's what humans do." The words hung in the air like a spark. Vorak tilted his head slightly, studying the boy. He had conquered 100 worlds, fought armies, destroyed cities, but no one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had looked at him without fear. "You think your courage makes you strong?" Vorak asked. Eli smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It makes me human." Vorak turned away, walking toward the observation window. Outside, the stars glowed softly beyond the smoke. For the first time in years, he felt something other than power, something like peace. Eli stepped closer, careful but unafraid. "Why do you conquer?" he asked quietly. Vorak didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "Because I must." He touched the glass gently, his reflection shining red. "When I was young, my world burned," he said. "We were weak, hunted, forgotten, so I promised never to kneel again." Eli's eyes softened. "So you made others kneel instead." Vorak turned, eyes flashing, but he didn't strike. His voice trembled for the first time. "Do not pretend to understand my pain." Eli met his gaze. "You're right, I don't," he said softly. "But I know pain doesn't have to become cruelty." The words cut deeper than any blade. Vorak's jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling. He had faced countless enemies. None had ever made him question himself, yet this boy, small and fragile, was undoing him piece by piece. Suddenly, a loud explosion shook the floor. Red warning lights flashed. Enemy ships inbound. Drath's voice crackled through the comms. "My lord, the fleet approaches. They call you a traitor for letting the prisoners escape." Vorak closed his eyes. "Of course they do." Eli looked around, alarmed. "They'll destroy you." Vorak turned to him. Calm but cold. "They'll destroy us," Eli frowned. "Then let me help." Vorak blinked, confused. "You would fight for me? After all I've done?" Eli nodded. "I'm not fighting for you. I'm fighting for everyone who still believes mercy is stronger than fear." For a brief second, something like pride flickered in Vorak's eyes. He stepped forward, placing one massive hand on Eli's shoulder. "Then we fight together," he said. The ship trembled as enemy fire struck the hull. Eli followed Vorak to the command deck. The crew looked up in shock as the great warlord walked in. With a human at his side, some whispered, some hesitated. Vorak's voice thundered through the bridge. "Prepare defenses!" "But my lord," one shouted, "the council declared you fallen." Vorak growled. "Then let them see how far the fallen can rise." The crew obeyed instantly. Eli took position beside Vorak, his hands gripping the console through the front window. Massive enemy ships appeared, black and gold. Carrying the mark of the Galactic Legion, Eli's heart pounded. "That's a lot of ships." Vorak smirked slightly. "Enough to make this interesting." The first wave hit. Explosions lighting the stars. The ship shook violently. Sparks raining from the ceiling. Eli fell, but Vorak caught him with one hand, lifting him easily. "Stay with me, human," he said. "The galaxy is watching." Together they fought, not as conqueror and prisoner, but as two souls standing against an empire. Eli directed power to the shields, calling out coordinates. Vorak commanded his troops with booming precision. Every time the hull cracked, Eli shouted for them to hold on. Every time fear crept in, Vorak's voice thundered above it. And somehow, against all odds, the ship stayed standing. When the final enemy vessel retreated into darkness, silence filled the bridge. Eli slumped to the floor. Exhausted, Vorak stood still, staring at the wreckage outside. "You fought well," he said. His tone soft. Eli smiled faintly. "Not bad for a human." Vorak looked down at him, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly, almost a smile. "You are unlike any being I have ever met," he said. Eli leaned back against the wall. "Maybe that's because humans are full of surprises. The lights flickered once more, and Vorak turned to the window. For centuries, he had ruled through fear, but tonight, he had ruled through courage, and it felt different, better. He touched the cracked glass and whispered to himself, "Perhaps it is not power that makes one strong, but the heart." Eli looked at him quietly. Sensing the change, he didn't say anything. He didn't need to, because in that moment, the warlord who once conquered worlds had begun to conquer his own darkness. And somewhere deep in the vast silence of space, a spark of humanity burned brighter than any star. The silence after the battle didn't last long. Out in the endless dark, new signals began to flash. More ships. Hundreds of them, the Galactic Legion, had come. Their purpose was clear, to erase Vorak, his ship and everyone who stood with him. The bridge lights flickered red again. Eli stood beside Vorak, his heart pounding as new alarms screamed across the control room. "They're surrounding us," one officer shouted. "Multiple fleets from the eastern sector." Vorak's voice cut through the noise. Calm and steady, all remaining power to shields. "But my lord, the engines will fail," another argued. "Then let them fail," Vorak said. "We fight here." Eli turned to him. "You can't win this." Vorak's burning eyes met his. "Maybe not," he said quietly. "But sometimes victory isn't surviving. It's standing for what must be right." Eli felt a shiver run through him. The same words he had spoken once now coming back to him from the warlord's mouth. The ship shook again as the first barrage hit. The deck cracked, panels burst into flame. Kale rushed into the bridge, his feathers singed but his eyes bright. "The prisoners you freed, they're ready to fight." Eli turned in surprise. "You got them here?" Kale nodded. "They said if a human can face the Legion, so can they." Vorak looked at the alien. Then at Eli, a slow, proud smile crossed his face. "So the boy's courage spreads like a virus," Eli grinned. "A good kind of virus." The communication screens flickered on, showing the face of Lord Sareth. Commander of the Legion, his golden armor gleamed. His voice smooth and cruel. "Vorak," he said, "you were once the strongest among us, now you hide behind a child." Vorak stepped forward, his shadow filling the screen. "I do not hide," he said, "I lead," Sareth sneered. "Then lead your crew into death," and the transmission cut. Outside, the sky exploded with light. Energy blasts filled the void like falling stars. Vorak's ship trembled as explosions tore through the outer decks. Kale shouted orders. Eli ran to the control board. Rerouting power, sparks rained down, smoke filled the air. Still no one fled through the chaos. Vorak's voice echoed like thunder. "Hold the line. Every second we stand is another second they cannot break us." Even the smallest crew members, mechanics, engineers, freed prisoners, took up arms. The warship became a storm of courage. And in the heart of it all stood Eli, a boy from Earth, shouting commands beside the galaxy's most feared warrior. As the battle raged, Eli saw an enemy cruiser charging a massive beam. It was aimed straight at them. "Vorak! The main cannon, it's locking on," he yelled. Vorak didn't hesitate. "Target it!" Eli checked the system. "Weapons offline!" Vorak growled. "Then we do this the old way." He stormed to the hangar, his heavy armor dragging sparks against the floor. Eli followed, gasping. "What are you doing?" Vorak turned, handing him a small device. "The ship's core. This will release all remaining power, but it must be triggered from inside the reactor." Eli frowned. "That's suicide." Vorak looked at him, silent for a long time. Then he said, "Once, I conquered worlds for myself," he said. "Now I will fight for something greater." Before Eli could protest, Vorak stepped into the lift. The doors closed, leaving the boy holding the device. Kale ran up beside him. "Where is he going?" Eli's voice broke. "To save us, down in the reactor chamber." Vorak moved through smoke and fire. The hum of the ship's dying heart surrounded him. He placed the device near the glowing core, his armor cracking from the heat above him. The sound of explosions grew louder. He closed his eyes, whispering, "May this be my last war." Back on the bridge, the sensors flashed. A wave of pure energy burst from the ship, spreading through the fleet like a tidal storm. The enemy cannons overloaded, ships collided, engines burned out. The sky turned white for a moment, then faded to silence when the light cleared. The Legion fleet was gone, drifting wrecks scattered across the stars, but the warship itself was broken. Eli looked out the window, tears in his eyes. "He did it," he whispered. Kale placed a hand on his shoulder.
"He saved us all." Then the comm crackled, Vorak's voice weak but steady. Human?
Are you still there? Eli grabbed the mic. I'm here. You're alive. Vorak chuckled faintly. For now. Listen, Eli said, his voice shaking. We'll come for you, just hold on. Vorak smiled in the darkness. You already did, boy, he said softly. You saved me long before this battle. The line went silent. Eli stood there, tears mixing with smoke and dust. Outside the stars were quiet again, but in that silence, something new had been born. A legend, the story of the human who refused to bow, and the warlord who learned to kneel, not in defeat, but in respect. The war was over. The stars were quiet again. Glowing softly across the endless dark, broken ships drifted through space like ghosts. Their engines cold, their crews gone. Among them floated the remains of Vorak's mighty vessel, scarred, silent but not forgotten. Inside the damaged warship, emergency lights flickered weakly. Eli stood among the ruins, his clothes torn, his face covered in ash. He could still hear Vorak's last words echoing in his mind. You already saved me, boy. The control deck was cracked open to the void, and yet somehow the stars didn't feel cold anymore. Kale hovered beside him, his golden feathers dimmed from battle. He's gone, Kale said softly. Eli didn't answer. He just stared out at the stars. Part of him refused to believe it, the great warlord gone, but then a faint sound came through the comm, static at first, then a weak, familiar voice. Human. Still standing? Eli froze, eyes wide. Vorak! The voice chuckled faintly. You didn't think I'd fall so easily, did you? Eli laughed, half crying, half smiling. Where are you? I'm in the escape core, deep inside the ship, Vorak said. You'll have to leave me. Eli shook his head. I'm not leaving anyone. Vorak's tone softened. You don't understand. If you stay, you die. Then I guess we die together, Eli said quietly. There was silence for a long moment. Then Vorak spoke, his voice full of something Eli had never heard before, peace. You are the only human I've met who made me want to live like one. Eli found the escape hatch half buried under fallen metal. He pulled and pushed, using all his strength. The door finally opened, revealing Vorak, his armor broken, his face burned, his eyes still glowing faintly red. He looked smaller now, more mortal. Eli knelt beside him. Come on, we can make it. Vorak smiled weakly. Always standing, never bowing. Eli grabbed his arm. And neither do you. With Kale's help, they carried Vorak to one of the last working escape pods. The engines groaned, the walls shook as the pod launched. The ship behind them began to crumble. Swallowed by its own fire, Eli watched through the window. Tears in his eyes. That ship had been a prison, a weapon, and now a grave. But from its ashes, something greater was born. When they landed on a small moon nearby, Vorak collapsed. Eli rushed to his side. Stay with me. Vorak's breath was shallow, his voice fading. Human, he whispered. Do you know what the Legion will do when they learn of this? Eli nodded. They'll come for us. Vorak smiled faintly. Then let them. He looked at the stars one last time and said, I was wrong about power. Eli frowned. What do you mean? Vorak's voice grew weaker. Power is not fear, it is hope. And with those words, his eyes slowly dimmed. Eli sat there for a long time, holding his friend's hand. The great alien warlord who once conquered galaxies, now at peace. Kale placed a feather over Vorak's chest. Whispering an ancient blessing, Eli whispered, Rest easy. Old warlord, you earned it. Days later, a rescue ship arrived. It wasn't from the Legion. It was a coalition of freed worlds. Aliens of every kind stood together under a new symbol, the mark of unity. And they all knew the story, the human who refused to bow, and the warlord who learned to stand beside him. When Eli stepped out of the rescue ship, he didn't see fear in their eyes, he saw respect. One of the captains saluted him. The galaxy knows your name. Boy! Eli looked around, shaking his head. Don't remember me, he said softly. Remember why we stood years past? The story spread across star systems, told in whispers and songs. Children on distant worlds played with wooden swords pretending to be Eli and Vorak. Slaves on conquered planets rose up, chanting the words that started it all. Never kneel. And the Legion, once feared across the stars, began to crumble from within. In time, a great monument was built on Vorak's homeworld. Two figures stood carved from stone, one alien, one human, standing side by side. Underneath were words written in both their languages. Strength is not in power. But in heart, Eli stood before that monument many years later. Now older, his hair streaked with silver. He placed his hand on the stone, smiling faintly. "You'd hate this statue," he said softly. "Too peaceful for a warlord." The wind rustled gently across the valley. Almost like laughter, Eli looked up at the stars, whispering, "You changed everything." As the twin suns set behind the hills, their light shimmered across the monument for a moment. The shadows looked alive, two friends standing together again. One born of war, one born of hope. And though both were gone, their story lived on across the universe. Because somewhere in every heart that dared to stand, in every soul that refused to kneel, the legend of the boy and the warlord still burned, brighter than any star.